The shelter I worked at in Chicago sits on the west side, 2 blocks off Van Buren, and in January of 2022, it was full every night before the doors even opened. When it's -10 out there and the wind is coming off the lake sideways, you don't turn people away. You put mats in the hall if you have to. You let them sleep sitting up in the chairs by the vending machine. Nobody says anything about capacity. I worked the overnight 10 to 7, 3 days a week. My job was small. I made sure nobody fought, nobody used, nobody wandered outside to smoke and forgot to come back in. Most nights I read a paperback at the front desk and got up every hour to walk the floor. The hall smelled like bleach and wet wool and faintly whatever the kitchen had made for dinner. On Wednesdays, chili. On Fridays, some kind of fish. The heating vents rattled if you leaned on the wall. I knew Marek from the winter of 2019. He showed up on the first cold night that November and stayed until the shelter downgraded to day-only service in April. Then he was gone. Next November he came back. Same thing the year after. By 2022 I'd known him 3 seasons. He was maybe 70, thin. Gray beard, cut short with kitchen scissors, you could tell. He always took the same cot if it was open, second row from the west wall, closest to the radiator. He didn't drink, didn't argue about the TV, didn't ask for anything except an extra blanket sometimes. He read paperbacks too, westerns mostly, and the occasional Reader's Digest that somebody left on the table. We'd nod at each other. Once or twice a winter, he'd sit at the front desk for 10 minutes and tell me about a job he used to have on the rail yards down in Blue Island. That was the extent of our friendship. It was enough for both of us. The first night I saw him doing it was January 6th. I remember because we'd just cleared the Epiphany dinner plates from the community fridge, and the kitchen still smelled like ham grease. Around 3 in the morning, the hall was quiet except for the coughs. There's always a rhythm of coughs in a shelter in January, from all corners, like a bad choir. I got up to do my walkthrough and saw Marek standing at the foot of a cot near the door. Not his cot. He was leaning down. I thought he was checking on the guy. That happens. Somebody has a bad dream, somebody sits up gasping, another resident goes over. It's a decent instinct, and I don't get in the way of it unless things escalate, but he wasn't leaning close. He was placing something on the floor by the cot's leg. Then he straightened up and moved to the next cot. I watched him from the corridor. He did it maybe 6 or 7 times. Just walked between the cots, bent, set something down, moved on. When he was done, he went back to his own bed and lay down facing the wall. In the morning, when I was doing the cot checks before shift change, I looked at the floor. Nothing there. No wrappers, no coins. I even ran my hand along the tile near 2 of the cots I remembered him stopping at. Cold linoleum. Nothing. I told myself he was probably just checking on people and I'd imagined the placing motion. Old guys shuffle. They bend. It's not that strange. 2 nights later, I saw him do it again. This time I was closer. I was standing by the linen cart at the end of the row when he passed within maybe 8 feet of me. He didn't see me, or he did and didn't care. He stopped at a cot where a younger guy named Denny was sleeping, curled up under 2 coats. Marek reached into the pocket of his cardigan, pulled something out with 2 fingers, and set it down on the floor next to Denny's boots. I stepped over after he moved on and crouched. It was a pebble, gray, round, about the size of a nickel, smooth like it had been in a river or in someone's pocket a very long time. I left it where it was. By morning, gone. I checked with the day cleaner and she said she hadn't started yet. I checked the trash by the front door. I looked under the cot. I even lifted the edge of Denny's mat when he went to the bathroom. Nothing. That week I watched him 3 more times, never the same cots twice. Sometimes he'd do 4 in a night, sometimes 8. Once he did just 1 and went back to sleep. Every morning the stones were gone before I clocked out. I want to say I got scared. I didn't. I got curious in a way I didn't like. There's a kind of curiosity you get on the overnight where you know you're going to have to ask about something, and you keep pushing it off because you know the answer is going to sit on you. For a couple of nights I ran through the worst versions in my head. Was he marking people to rob? Nothing ever went missing. Was he leaving something for them to find? A pill or a note? The stones were just stones. No message, no wrapping. Was he losing it? He didn't look like a man losing anything. He worked the crossword in the community room in ink. I asked my coworker on the day shift, a woman named Rita, if she'd ever seen Marek doing anything odd in the mornings. She said no. She said he was usually the first one up, folded his blanket, went and drank coffee in the corner by the window. She said he was one of her favorites. She said he reminded her of her uncle from Krakow. I didn't tell her about the stones. The reason I waited a week to ask him was, honestly, because I liked him, and I didn't want him to think I was building a case against him. In shelter work, you learn fast that residents get paranoid, and rightly so. Every time somebody asks them a question, it's because somebody upstairs is deciding whether they get to keep the cot. I didn't want to be that person for him, but I also couldn't stop watching. I asked him on a Sunday night, slow shift, snow coming down thick outside, the kind that muffles the blue line so you only hear it when it's right at the platform. He was sitting at the folding table by the vending machine with a paperback open. I brought over 2 paper cups of tea, put one in front of him, and sat down. He looked at the cup and then at me. "You want something?" "I've been seeing you walk the floor at night," I said. "You put stones down by people's cots. I wanted to ask what that's about, if you don't mind." He closed the book on his thumb without marking the page. He didn't look upset. He looked like a man who'd been expecting the question and wasn't sure if he'd get to it before spring. "How long you been watching?" he said. "About a week." He nodded. He picked up the tea, blew on it, took a small sip. "I know which ones aren't going to make it," he said. "To spring. I put a stone so somebody knows they were here." I didn't say anything. The vending machine hummed and cycled, that little rattle it does when the compressor kicks on. "You mean you have a feeling," I said. "I mean I know," he said. "I've been doing this a long time. It's not a trick. It's just something I can see in a person, at a point, when it gets close." He set the tea down. "I take the stone back in the morning because I don't want anybody thinking anything bad. I keep them in a tobacco tin. When somebody goes, I take theirs out and put it back in the river." "Which river?" I said, because it was the only thing my brain could grab onto. "The one out by Blue Island," he said, "where I used to work." We sat there for a while. He drank his tea slow. He didn't try to convince me of anything. He didn't ask me not to tell. I went back to the desk. That winter, 3 men died. Not in the hall exactly. One died at Stroger Hospital after we called an ambulance for chest pain, a guy named Lewis, mid-50s. One died in the alley behind the building on a Tuesday morning about an hour after checkout. We didn't know his name until the police came. He'd been with us maybe 4 nights total. And Denny, the young guy in the coats, overdosed in a bathroom on Ashland in February. His girlfriend came by the shelter after to pick up a bag he'd left, and that's how we found out. I checked my memory each time. I'd seen Marek put a stone next to all 3 of them within the week before they died. Louis, 3 days before. The alley man the night before, though at the time I didn't know he was leaving. Denny about 6 days before, the same night I first watched Marek from up close. I never told the director. I don't know how to explain that. If I'd said anything, they'd have moved Marek out. Maybe they'd have called it harassment of other residents. Maybe they'd have said he needed a psych eval. He didn't need one. Whatever this was for him, it wasn't a problem for anyone but me. The rest of that January and into February, I kept working my nights. When I heard him get up around 3, I'd fill 2 paper cups from the urn in the kitchen. Tea, no sugar, the way he took it. I'd set one on the folding table for when he came back. Then I'd sit at the front desk and read, and I wouldn't look up when he passed. He'd drink his tea and go back to bed. In the morning, the floor would be clean. He didn't come back the following winter. Rita told me in November that she'd heard from someone at another shelter that he'd gone to stay with a nephew in Gary. I don't know if that was true. I hope it was. I still work the same shift. I keep tea in the cabinet by the urn. Sometimes on the coldest nights, when I do my walkthrough and pass the second row from the west wall, I look down at the floor by the radiator cot without meaning to. There's never anything there. I keep walking. It was almost 11 at night when the 2 of them came through the front doors, and the first thing that hit me was that they didn't look like family. I was working the overnight admin desk at a small hospice on the west side of Charleston, out toward the Ashley River, May of 2022. The building was 1 story, red brick, magnolias in the parking lot dropping those big brown petals all over the walkway. If you've never worked hospice, the night shift is mostly quiet paperwork, checking on the aides, keeping the phone answered, updating charts. Most nights I saw 1 visitor after 9 p.m., sometimes none. Official visiting hours ended at 8. After that, family could still come, but only if they were on the approved contact list in the patient's chart, or if the charge nurse had cleared them ahead of time. Nobody had told me to expect anyone. The 2 men walked up to the desk together. The older one was maybe 60, gray hair combed back flat, khakis, a navy blazer a little too warm for the weather. The younger one was in his 30s, dark polo, jeans, one of those slim leather portfolios tucked under his arm. Neither of them looked like they'd been crying. In this job, you get used to noticing that. People coming to see a dying relative at almost 11 at night usually look wrecked. These 2 looked like they'd stopped for coffee on the way. "Evening," the older one said. He had a soft accent, hard to place. "We're here to see Mr. Boone. Room 12. I pulled up the chart on the monitor. Mr. Boone was one of ours. Late-stage pancreatic, on comfort measures. We'd moved him to a morphine drip 2 days earlier. His breathing had gotten shallow that afternoon, and the day nurse had left a note saying it was probably a matter of hours, not days. Can I ask your relation to Mr. Boone?" "Cousins," the older one said. "On his mother's side. We drove down from outside Asheville. Got the call this afternoon." I kept my face neutral. The approved list in the chart had 3 names on it. A daughter named Colleen, who lived up in Mount Pleasant. A son, Wade, in Georgia. A longtime neighbor listed as a family friend. No cousins. That by itself didn't mean much. Distant family isn't always on the chart, but I made a note. I'll need to sign you in. Photo ID and full names, please. The younger one already had his wallet out. He handed me his license, and I copied down the name on it. Then the older one started to speak. Peter Halverson, and my nephew here is... Peter, the younger one cut in, sharp, like he'd stepped on his foot under the desk. She wants my license, not yours. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe half a second, but I caught it, because the license in my hand didn't say Halverson. It said something else, a different last name entirely, and the older one had just introduced himself with a name that didn't match his nephew's ID. I looked back up. The older one was smiling now, a little sheepish. Sorry, long day, I get scattered. No problem, I said, and I meant it, in the sense that I wasn't going to make it their problem. I was going to make it mine, quietly, until I figured out what was actually going on. I told them I had to check with the charge nurse before letting anyone back at this hour. Policy, standard. They both nodded, and the older one said, "Take your time, sweetheart. We've been driving all day." I walked down the hall to the nurse's station. As soon as I was around the corner, I stopped and thought for a second. The nurse on duty was Denise. She'd been doing hospice work for maybe 20 years. I found her in the med room counting out pills. I told her what had happened, the mismatched names, the interruption, the story about Asheville. She didn't roll her eyes or tell me I was being paranoid. She just said, "Call the daughter, right now. Use the number in the chart, not anything they give you." I went back to the desk, told the 2 men the nurse was finishing up with another patient and would be over in a minute, offered them water. The younger one said no thanks. The older one asked where the bathroom was. I pointed him down the hall. He didn't go, he just sat back down. I picked up the phone and called Colleen at the cell number listed in her father's chart. It was almost 11:15 by then, and I felt bad waking her, but this was the kind of thing that couldn't wait. She picked up on the second ring. She was already awake. She'd been expecting a call, just not this one. I kept my voice low and casual, like I was reading off a form. I told her 2 gentlemen had arrived claiming to be her father's cousins from Asheville, and I wanted to confirm before I let them back. Silence on the line. Then she said, and I remember this exactly, "My father doesn't have any cousins. His mother was an only child. He was an only child. I don't know who those people are." I asked her to hold, to stay on the line but stay quiet. I put the phone down, walked back out to the lobby, and told the 2 men the charge nurse was going to be another few minutes. Then I went back to the desk and picked up the phone again. Colleen was already talking. She said her father had been contacted about a week earlier by someone claiming to represent a settlement fund for military veterans. Her dad had been in the Navy, briefly, back in the 60s. The caller wanted him to sign paperwork releasing some kind of benefit. Colleen had told them her father was in end-of-life care and could not consent to anything, and she'd hung up. She thought that was the end of it. She asked me not to let them see him under any circumstances. I said I wasn't planning to. She said she was calling the Charleston police right now and would be here herself in 20 minutes. I hung up. My hands were steady, but my mouth had gone dry. I sat back down at the desk and looked over. The older one was scrolling on his phone. The younger one was watching me, not staring, just watching, like he was reading my face for something. When I met his eyes, he looked back down at his portfolio. I asked them, as friendly as I could, if they'd traveled with any paperwork. Photos, keepsakes, anything they wanted to bring in for Mr. Boone. Sometimes families do. The younger one said, "Just some things he asked us to bring by." "Family documents," the older one added. "Nothing important." I said that was nice of them. I said the nurse would be right out. For the next 12 minutes, and I know it was 12 because I kept looking at the clock on the wall, I sat behind that desk and pretended to type. I answered a fake phone call. I filed a couple of blank forms. The whole time I was aware of the 2 men in my peripheral vision, and I was aware of the hallway behind me, and I was aware that the nearest actual security was a rent-a-cop who did a walkthrough every 2 hours and was probably out in the parking lot. The younger one shifted in his seat twice. The older one got up once, wandered to the window, came back. Neither of them tried to walk past the desk. I think if they had, I would have said something loud enough to bring Denise out, but they didn't. They were trying to look patient. The police came in without lights or sirens. 2 officers, one in uniform, one in plain clothes. The plainclothes one flashed his badge across the desk without saying anything, and I nodded toward the 2 men in the lobby chairs. What happened next was almost boring, and that's the part that stuck with me. There was no shouting. The officers just walked up and asked the 2 men to step outside for a conversation. The older one started to protest, said something about visiting his cousin. The plainclothes officer said calmly, "Sir, we're going to talk out here first." And they went. Colleen arrived about 10 minutes after that. She'd driven over the bridge from Mount Pleasant in her pajamas and a raincoat. She went straight back to her father's room without saying much to me. Denise walked her in. I found out most of the rest of it over the following week. In pieces, some from the police and some from Colleen. The two men were not cousins, obviously. They were connected to a small legal outfit that operated out of a strip mall over in North Charleston. Their business, if you can call it that, was tracking down dying people through obituary pre-listings, hospice discharge notices, and public probate filings, then showing up in person with documents. The idea was to get a signature, or something close enough that would let them file a claim against the estate later. There's a name for it: predatory legal solicitation. It's a felony in South Carolina. The younger one, the one with the portfolio, had a folder inside it with a durable power of attorney form already partially filled out with Mr. Boone's name and date of birth. The signature line was blank. Mr. Boone died the next afternoon, a little after 2. Colleen was there. Wade had made it down from Georgia by then. The neighbor from the chart came by that evening with a casserole. Nobody else walked in. I worked another year at that hospice before I moved on. In that year, we updated our overnight visitor policy so anyone arriving after 8 p.m. had to be verified with a family contact by phone before they got past the front desk. No exceptions. The thing I keep coming back to isn't the moment the older one said the wrong name. It's the half second after, when the younger one cut him off. That's the part that tells me they'd done this before. I've covered federal court in Chicago for about 8 years now, and by 2022 I thought I'd seen the whole menu. Fraud trials, tax stuff, a couple of gang cases out of the west side. You get used to it. The security line at the Dirksen building, the coffee at the shop across Dearborn, the same 3 sketch artists rotating in and out. It becomes a job. The trial I was covering that November was different in scale, but not in shape. Racketeering, wire fraud, a few counts tied to a homicide that they couldn't quite make stick. 6 defendants. The lead guy, I'll call him by the nickname the other reporters used, the barber, because half his family had a barbershop in Elmwood Park, and it was the only detail the sketch guys could latch onto. He wasn't the boss of anything anymore. He was the last piece of something that used to be bigger, and the U.S. Attorney's Office was very interested in closing that file. The trial ran almost 5 weeks. I sat in the same seat every day, second row of the press box, behind a guy from the Tribune. On my other side was the court's staff interpreter, an older woman named Franca, who worked Italian for the defense. Some of the older wiretaps were in dialect, and even the government's translators disagreed on words, so Franca was there to check the record in real time. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a habit of sucking mints during long stretches of testimony. By the last week, everyone in the room was exhausted. The barber's lawyer had stopped objecting to anything that wasn't strictly necessary. The barber himself had this look I'd seen before on long trial defendants, sort of collapsed inward at the shoulders, like a man who had accepted the shape of the rest of his life. He wore the same navy suit every day. His tie was always a little crooked, and I don't think it was on purpose. Verdicts came down on a Wednesday. Guilty across the board on the racketeering counts, split on the wire fraud, not guilty on the homicide predicate. Sentencing was set for a later date, but there was still one more day of housekeeping in front of Judge Kendall, a status hearing on forfeiture, and that was the day I want to talk about. That morning was normal in every way that matters. My daughter had a half day scheduled at her school in Oak Park. She was in 5th grade. She'd stayed up too late the night before and wandered into the kitchen at 7:15 in a blue cable knit sweater her grandmother had sent from Michigan. It was the first cold snap of the year, and she'd pulled it on over her uniform shirt without asking, which was against the school dress code, and which I did not have the energy to fight about. My husband handed her a granola bar. I said I'd see her at dinner. That was the whole exchange. I got downtown by 9. Security line, elevator, 2nd row. Franca was already there, mints out, glasses down. The forfeiture hearing was dull. The government listed properties. The defense agreed to most. A few they argued about. It was going to be over by lunch. The marshals started standing up around 11:30. That's usually the signal. When they move, the defendants move, and everyone else in the room stops shuffling paper because you don't want to miss the walkout. The barber stood, adjusted his cuffs with his wrists still uncuffed, and let his lawyer pat him on the arm. Then he started up the aisle. The press box is on the aisle. There's maybe 2 feet between the low wooden rail and the path the marshals walked them through. I've had defendants glance over before. Sometimes they nod at someone from their old neighborhood. Sometimes they mouth something at their wife. It's not unusual. The barber stopped. He didn't lunge or lean in. He just stopped walking, right at my row, and turned his head maybe 15 degrees. Not toward the Tribune guy, not toward the wire service, at me. He looked at me the way you look at a name you're trying to place, and then he found it, and his face didn't change, but I could tell he'd found it. He said something in Italian, very quietly. It wasn't projected at all. It was the volume of a private comment between two people who happened to be near each other. The marshal behind him put a hand on his back and said, "Keep walking, sir." He kept walking. I sat there for maybe 2 seconds, not understanding what had happened. Franca was very still next to me. Her mints were on the ledge in front of us. She had a hand on the edge of the bench, like she was steadying herself. She leaned toward my ear. He said, "Your daughter is in blue today." I said, "What?" She said it again, in English. She was whispering because we were in a courtroom and the judge hadn't left yet, but her whisper had a shape to it that I've never heard from her before or since, like she wanted to be wrong about what she just translated. I want to be honest about the next 30 seconds because I've thought about them a lot. My first move wasn't fear. My first move was to explain it. Franca misheard. It was a coincidence. Kids wear blue all the time. Half the sweaters in every school district are blue. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking past me. I ran through all of that in the time it took the deputy to say, "All rise." Then I stood up, and I remembered exactly what she had put on that morning, and I remembered that I had not posted a photo, and I remembered that my daughter's school does not allow sweaters over uniform shirts, and that meant the sweater was either visible for the 15 minutes she stood at the bus stop on Berkshire, or it had been taken off before her first class and was inside her locker. Either way, someone had to have seen her that morning, in person, between the front door and the bus. I walked out of the courtroom fast enough that the guy from the Tribune said something to me and I didn't hear him. I don't remember the hallway. I remember pushing through the door of the little vestibule outside the courtroom where reporters aren't technically supposed to make calls, and I called my husband, and I said his name, and then I said, "Go get her right now." He said, "What?" I said, "Go to the school, go now. I'll explain in the car. Don't call the school first, just go." He is a very calm person. He said, "Okay." He hung up. He was in the car within a minute. I know because I checked the timestamps on my phone that night, over and over. Like the seconds between my call and his arrival could still hurt me if I looked away. The next hour is the part I'm least clear on. I found a court security officer in the corridor and told him what happened. He asked me to repeat it. I did. He asked if I was a witness in the case. I said no, I was press. He asked why the defendant would speak to me. I said I didn't know. He walked me to a small room down the hall with a table and 2 chairs and told me not to leave, which was not phrased as a request. 2 more people came in. One was from the Marshal's service, one I never got a title for. They wanted to know exactly what Franca had said and whether she was sure. They sent for her. She came in still holding her glasses and repeated the translation. Then they moved to my daughter's mourning, what she was wearing, who could have seen her, whether we had domestic help, whether anyone had been in the house recently, whether my husband had told anyone at work about the trial, whether I had. My husband called me from the school parking lot at some point in there. She was fine. She was in the office. She thought she was in trouble. He put her on for 10 seconds. She said, "Am I in trouble?" I said, "No, sweetheart. We're just going to have a weird afternoon." I don't think I've ever loved my own voice for staying flat the way I loved it in that moment. The prosecutor came down. He is not a man who does small talk. He asked me to walk him through the encounter one more time, then stood with his hands in his pockets looking at a point on the wall. He said something to the marshals that I didn't quite catch. Then he told me they were going to treat this as a threat against a witness, because that was the fastest procedural door to walk us through, even though I wasn't a witness and never had been. We were in a hotel by that night, not one I've stayed in since. My husband packed a bag for our daughter that included the blue sweater, because she asked for it, and I didn't have the heart to say no. 3 weeks. Different hotels twice. My daughter did school on a laptop. My husband worked from a desk with a plastic wrapper still on the phone. I filed my sentencing coverage from a room I couldn't tell you the number of. They never figured out how he knew. The marshals did a full sweep of our house. Nothing. They pulled the school's exterior camera footage from that morning. Buses, parents, kids, a delivery van that checked out. They interviewed drivers on our block. They looked at my husband's phone, my daughter's tablet. Nothing anyone would show me. When we moved back home in December, the deputy who walked us through the door told me they had not found the channel. Those were his words. "We have not found the channel." He said in his experience, not finding it did not mean it wasn't there. The barber is serving his sentence in a facility I could look up but haven't. He never said anything else to me, and I never asked to talk to him. My daughter is in high school now. She has a lot of sweaters. She doesn't remember most of that November, which is a small kindness I try not to poke at. I still work the courthouse. Same seat. Franca retired the following spring. When defendants walk out of the room now, I look down at my notes until they're past the rail. It isn't a rule anyone gave me. It's just what I do. Appreciate you guys watching till the end. Let me know which 4chan story was your favorite down in the comments. And if you're looking for more scary stories, the channel has plenty of other videos to check out. Bye for now. See you soon.